the skinwalker of Navajo Nation. I like the desert at night. They say it's dangerous to be out here, but I like it. It's good to sit by a campfire and drink a beer, out here where there isn't any noise or traffic. You can see all the stars because there aren't any electric lights to chase them away. Sometimes the wind sings to you, but then somebody usually comes along and messes it up somehow. Mostly it's drunks who want to beat you up because you're from the reservation. So when I heard pebbles shifting somewhere off to my left, the hairs on the back of my neck started to tingle, and my hand inched a little closer to my Bowie knife. The figure that came walking out of the darkness didn't look very threatening, though. Just an old man wearing traditional Navajo clothing and leaning on a crooked walking stick as he shuffled quietly towards me. "Getting cold," came the old man's voice, dry as the desert. I expected him to say more, but instead he just sat down across the campfire from me, laying the walking stick casually across his lap. There was something about him that made me uneasy, and my apprehension increased when his hand vanished into a leather pouch that hung from his belt. But he pulled forth only a crumpled pack of cigarettes, holding them slightly towards me. "Smoke?" "Sure," I replied, as my nerves began to relax. When he tossed me the pack, I noticed there were only 2 cigarettes left inside. I took one and tossed the pack back to him. I held my chrome Zippo towards him, but he instead took a wooden match from behind his ear, scraping it against a small grey rock that dangled from a leather cord worn around his neck. The sudden flare of light illuminated his ancient, weathered face, and his eyes seemed to sparkle eerily for a moment. Then he sat smoking silently. "Dangerous out here at night, you know," he spoke softly after a while. "Lots of things come out at night, even things nobody believes in anymore. They still come around sometimes." I smiled a little. "You mean ghosts and goblins?" "Maybe ghosts," he answered after considering it a moment. "Not goblins, I don't think. Not even sure what a goblin is. But there are other things too. Things like the skinwalkers. You know about them." A sudden chill ran the length of my spine as the old man studied me quietly. "Mum used to tell me stories about them when I was little," I mumbled. "Then you know what can happen," said the old man. "They take the shape of a man and wear the skin of a man, but they're really more like an animal underneath. They have powers too. Folks used to say only a shaman could defeat them." He turned his attention to the campfire. His image seemed to ripple behind the waves of heat rising from the flames. Embers danced around him like angry red fairies. "Lots of other things out here too," he continued. "The Wendigo, the Chupacabra, all sorts of things. They don't come around much anymore, but sometimes they do." Silence settled over us like a damp woolen blanket, the campfire seeming to begrudge us what little heat it was providing. The stars twinkling above seemed suddenly to be laughing silently, sharing some sinister joke among themselves. The thin slice of moon sank behind a lone cloud bank, as though unwilling to witness whatever might transpire. The beast attacked us without warning. I felt claws sinking into my back as a great weight fell upon me. Then it was gone, and I rose to see the old man falling backwards. Whatever was on top of him wasn't visible, but I could see jagged rips appearing in his clothing and in his flesh. Then, suddenly, he was thrusting the walking stick upward, and there was a terrible screeching sound. The creature fell backwards into the fire and became visible as it writhed in the flames. I can't really describe it. Imagine a pale white maggot, taller than a man. Its bloated, mushy body bristling with claw-like barbs. There was something like a mouth at one end, with rows of shark-like teeth lining the inside. I saw a clump of black eyes that seemed completely lifeless as it rose from the fire and again hurled itself towards the old man. I'm not a hero. My brain was screaming for me to get out of there, to just run anywhere, to just get away. But then I heard the old man's screams, and I saw the empty cigarette pack lying crumpled on the ground, and something inside me stopped shaking and started getting angry instead. I tore away my clothes and then tore away my skin as well, revealing my true form. I was springing towards the ugly monstrosity before I really had time to think about it, which is probably just as well. As I struggled with the creature, attacking savagely with my own teeth and claws, I caught a glimpse of the old man rising weakly to his feet. His walking stick was beginning to glow faintly, casting an eerie green light upon him as he moved forwards. He plunged the stick deep into the creature's side. The thing stopped biting at my face and made that deafening screeching sound again, but this time it didn't stop screeching for a long time. I'm not sure if it died or just went someplace else. When it faded from view, I hope it died. The old man reached down to recover his walking stick from where it had fallen, watching me carefully. It's difficult for me to speak when I'm in my true form, but I can manage if I concentrate. What was it? I managed to ask. No idea, he answered with a puzzled frown. We stood staring at each other for a moment. You gonna need a new shirt, I pronounced quietly, pointing a talon at his torn and ruined clothing. That's nothing, he chuckled. You're gonna need a new skin. But then his smile faded, his grip tightening on the walking stick as he studied me in the campfire's flickering light. You can relax, I lisped. Shaman skin won't work on me. His eyes drifted uncertainly to his walking stick. Still, he said softly, I'm supposed to try to destroy you. Yep, I hissed. Same here, old man. We continued staring uneasily at each other for a moment longer. Then the old man's smile slowly returned. Crazy world, ain't it? Crazy world, I agreed. As he turned to go, I glanced around and saw the shredded remains of my jacket, snagging it with a claw. I turned back towards the old man, shuffling away into the darkness. Hey, Pops, I called quietly, tossing him the fresh pack of cigarettes that had been in my jacket pocket. I think I managed something like a human smile. He nodded thanks and then vanished into the desert night. I sat back down beside my campfire. A million stars twinkled overhead. They say it's dangerous being out here alone in the desert, but I like it. Sometimes the wind sings to you, and all you can do is sing back. Walking Sam, the Ghosts of Pine Ridge. I'm sure some of you have heard of Pine Ridge, South Dakota. If not, it's a Lakota reservation that's near the Black Hills of South Dakota, and it's one of the places that help perpetuate the stereotype of Native American reservations, being bad places to live due to the poverty, homelessness, crimes such as rape and murder, drug use, alcoholism, child abuse, and the most infamous of the problems, suicide. Sadly, it's mostly teenagers or younger who commit suicide. One of the beliefs in the Lakota tribe is a type of suicide spirit called Walking Sam, or Tall Man, as he is also called. Walking Sam appears as a 7-foot-tall man who has a lean figure, long arms. He has eyes, but he lacks a mouth and nose. When he lifts his arms, the souls of both Lakota men and women hang from them. Sometimes they say he wears a stovepipe hat along with his appearance, was sent to Earth as a punishment and wants company. With the help of the living conditions such as abuse, poverty, drug and alcohol abuse, racism and murder, Walking Sam tells those who are affected the most by these things, such as people between 12 and 34, to kill themselves, and even though he resembles Slender Man, He's actually been around for centuries, while Slender Man was made in 2009. The first known reference in the modern age is in the book In the Spirit of Crazy Horse by Peter Matthieson. In 1983 and in 2009, Walking Sam was spotted around the city of Pine Ridge, and in that year multiple teenage suicides happened. My personal belief of Walking Sam is that he goes to any place that has pain and suffering and feeds off of it. And since Pine Ridge is basically the Detroit of South Dakota, he will continue to entice those who have been affected by the terrible conditions to commit suicide. My grandmother used to warn me about stick Indians. I'm from a Native American family, not the my great-great-great-grandmother was a Cherokee princess native, the real deal. We eat fried bread at least once every 2 weeks, and I can tan all summer long without getting a hint of a sunburn, unlike my blindingly white friends. If you're from a native family, you know the stories. You don't whistle at night because it attracts the stick Indians. You stay away from the creek at night because we don't fuck with the little people. And you give Sasquatch his goddamn beef jerky and leave him the fuck alone. These are all things I've accepted as a fact of life, told to me by my grandma, a member of the Okanagan band in Canada. Now, I had never seen anything to quite back up her stories, but I'd heard the shrill, shrieking screams of the stick Indians. I'd heard the stories of my family when they would go hunting and find things that would call out to you from the bushes, things that push your truck in the middle in the night and scream at you. And my favorite nightmare, the stick Indians that like to attack those that are stupid enough to attract them. I went to bed hearing how they grow their tribes by finding pregnant women, ripping open their wombs and tearing out infants to raise as their own. I used to imagine their long, thin fingers splicing open my stomach, mangling my insides as they searched for something inside of me. I wasn't about to test the boundaries. I like living, thank you very much. Despite my wariness of the unknown, I still enjoy the outdoors. Hiking, camping, rappelling, fishing, you name it, I've done it. I'll spend hours outside if I can during the day. When the sun comes down, however, so do I. I stick close to the fire until the sun comes back up, and it's safe to be out and about once more. For my 18th birthday, my friends and I went camping. I had to beg my parents to let me, a 17-year-old girl spending the night, away from adult supervision, with boys. But with the art of persuasion I planned on using towards my future law degree, I managed to convince them with the facts that, at 17, I was going to be on my own soon, and having larger amounts of freedom might help me adjust the big, scary old world a little better. They eventually, although reluctantly, agreed on letting me go just this once, with the promise of a liquor, drug, and sex-free night amongst the trees. As if. We arrived at the camping spot during midday, the 6 of us. Peyton, my best friend, had picked the spot. He promised a level clearing, a nearby path to the lake, and a serene view of the stars above us at night, to be seen in a pot-induced haze. He didn't disappoint. I couldn't have asked for a more beautiful spot. Washington is known as the Evergreen State, for a reason, and the towering pines were worthy of pictures, far exceeding the capability of my phone. I knew that at night I'd be imagining all the things that could be looming at me among their branches, but in the daylight I reveled in breathing in their heavy scent. While Caleb set up the tent, Peyton and Shah and I unloaded the truck, leaving Darian and Andy to organize. Darian first tried to shrug off organizing duties, claiming, "I'm a guy, Serena." I don't know if you know this or not, but guys don't organize. That's what girls are. My feministic glare did well to shut him up fast, and my tongue cut him enough to make him fully appreciate the arts and skills of putting up camp in a well-sorted, organized fashion that really everyone should learn to master. After setting up and setting more than a few hot dogs on fire, Darian redeemed himself in my eyes by presenting to me a legally obtained bottle of cinnamon whiskey, cheerfully added to our mugs of hot chocolate. Tipsy, they started begging me for ghost stories. "Come on, Serena, we're camping. It's dark. This is what you're supposed to do," Peyton pointed out, in his most charming tone possible. "What's the worst that could happen?" "Well," I started, ready to point out that it could very well call them all forth and get our throats ripped out. But before I could finish, Caleb chimed in. "Please," Caleb added. For me, I blushed. Caleb had been my team captain, and although I tried hard to hide my crush, I'm sure it somehow bubbled over the sides and leaked out anyways. I admired his dedication and talent to our shared love of wrestling, and over the hours spent dying together, we soon had become close friends. I sighed, defeated. "Fiend, which one do you want to hear about this time?" A low voice spoke up. "I want to hear about the stick people," Andy requested, leaning forward in her chair. I winced. "The stick Indians? Are you sure?" I questioned, unwilling to relinquish my tales about them. She nodded eagerly, her hair shaking wildly. I could see pine needles in it from our earlier excursions. I sat back, my tongue loosened by the alcohol. "Well, they say that it was once a normal tribe, you know. They were tall, dark, with cascading black hair. They weren't always bad, but one day, in the fall, it started snowing early, and it didn't stop. The people there ran out of food, having not expected the long winter ahead of them, and before long, they were starving. Their hair started falling out, and what was left hung, long and stringy. Their faces grew gaunt and pale, their throats grew dry, and their voices turned hoarse, until they sounded like shrill screeches when they tried to talk. Their nails turned brittle, their skin tightened on their frames until they were thin like sticks. The chief needed to feed his people, but there was no food to feed them. The deer were gone, the rabbits scarce. The birds had long flew south. Their neighbors refused to share their own dwindling food supply. There was no other option. They came at night. They crept into the woods, towards the nearest tribe. They followed the sounds of whistling to the camp, and they attacked. The screaming filled the air, echoing in the valley for miles. The stick Indians were ruthless, slicing open skin with nails sharpened by hunger, tearing mouthfuls of flesh with hungry teeth. Once repulsed by the thought, they couldn't stop devouring the first fresh meat they'd tasted in months. It was delectable, sweet blood pouring from their mouths that they licked off the dirt, not willing to let the soil have what they so badly desired. When the sun rose, the stick Indians felt, for the first time, full. They slept, no longer kept awake by the dull prongs of hunger. At night, they awoke to the sounds of whistling. They went to them, pricks of hunger, itching their feet faster. It was silent, then whistling. I threw the closest thing to me at Caleb, who batted it away, laughing. "It's not funny," I growled, looking around furtively into the dark pines around us. "You don't mess with that kind of shit." He looked somber. "I'm sorry, Serena. I promise not to call the crazy imaginary friends you have to come hang out with us. I just thought they might want to have a few s'mores with us." I scowled at him and opened my mouth to snipe back before Shah opened hers. "Why don't we play a game?" she peace offered, looking between us, like hide-and-go-seek. I bit my lip as the others nodded, chiming in their approval. "I don't know," I said. "What time is it?" Peyton rolled his eyes as Andy whipped out her phone, 2:23, she answered. I thought it over. As long as we're all done by 3. It was well known that I refused to be outside or away from the campfire during the hour between 3 and 4 a.m. It was called the witching hour, when all the spirits came out and everything ran free. They agreed, and Caleb was chosen as the first seeker. 1, 2, 3, 4. I could hear him as I sprinted away, determined to find the best possible spot before he reached 100. 17, 18, 19, 20. 20-odd yards away I stopped, panting slightly, squinting my eyes in the dark. I could barely hear his voice in the distance. 74, 75, 76, 77. I stooped down below some low-hanging branches, huddling up in fetal position against the trunk, trying to quiet my breathing. Ready or not, here I come, Caleb's voice echoed. I scrunched up tighter, my ears alert. I couldn't hear any footsteps, and soon found my eyes heavy, dripping closed as I waited to be found, or for the loud ollie ollie oxen free of defeat. I let them close, leaning my head forward on my knees. My head snapped up with the shrill whistling in not-so-distance. My eyes, no longer weighed by the liquor, were wide. I could hear the crackling of footsteps on dry branches, shuffling around the fallen pine needles. The whistling drew closer, and I could feel my heart pounding in fear. My watch glowed faintly in the blackness. 2:49. How had Caleb not found me yet? Had I slept through the call? I was sure whatever was out there was going to kill me, rake my flesh from my bones and suck out the marrow. The footsteps stopped a few yards from the tree where I was hiding. Then a clap. I sighed with relief, kind of like a Marco. We clapped to try and find the others. I clapped back, listening to the footsteps shuffle towards me. The branches swayed around me, and Caleb's pale face loomed in the black. He squinted at me. Serena, is that you? I launched myself at him. I was so scared, I scolded him, trembling. I thought you were a stick Indian. I whispered the name, remembering how close to 3 a.m. it was. Was that you whistling? He nodded, smiling. I was trying to see if I could find the last stick Indian, Caleb joked, squeezing my thin side. It was a joke about how tiny I was, barely 5 foot and topping 105 pounds soaking wet. We should get back. I don't want to be out much longer, I said antsy, checking my watch. 2:56. If we hurried, we might make it. Caleb tugged on my hand, pulling me towards him. Why don't we risk it a little bit? I don't want to go back just yet, he murmured, his arms wrapping around my waist. I blinked at him, confused until he bent his head to mine, capturing my mouth in his. I was shocked and then softened, kissing him back until I felt his hands dipping below the hemline of my shirt. Wait, I muttered, tugging at his hands. He tightened his grip on my waist, continuing his path up my shirt and under my bra, squeezing painfully. Caleb, stop it, I said hoarsely, my hands pushing uselessly at his chest. His legs swept under mine effortlessly, years of wrestling practice put into use. Caleb chuckled. You know you want this too, he said lightly, pinning me down with one hand while his other undid my shorts. I kicked and squirmed while he tugged them down around my ankles, rolling me onto my back and holding me down, calmly whistling all the while. I screamed when I heard the zzz of his zipper and felt him hover above me, held down by his weight and his forearms on either side of me. When he split into me, I could feel the hot tears roll down my cheeks. My arms were splayed in front of me. I focused in on the glow-in-the-dark face of my watch. It was 3:06. It took me a second to realize the screams ringing in my ears was not my own. Caleb's weight suddenly lifted, and I scrambled away, clutching fistfuls of twigs and dirt in my efforts to get away, and turned around to look behind me at the gurgling screeches. It was black with dirt, long and lanky, crouched over Caleb. Its strength was apparent in its effortless way of holding down the muscular boy. Flailing beneath it, I couldn't see its face, hidden under a curtain of matted hair encrusted with bugs and bits of tree. But here, oh, I could hear every bit of it. Every slurp, every painful shred of flesh pulled free from the bones was apparent. I froze in sick fascination, held witness to every second of it, while Caleb's screams died in his throat, while he finished his meal. When he was done, he turned his head to me. His face was long and thin and hollow. I could see every bone in his skull, the black, bloodshot eyes sunk deep. His lips were thin and drawn back, revealing long grey teeth stained with blood and chunks of meat. I couldn't tear my eyes away from him, not even when he started crawling towards me. Stupidly, I thought of Tarzan walking towards Jane, how he put his weight forward on his hands and kind of hopped his long legs underneath him. He stopped inches from me, head tilted to the left. He lowered his face to mine until I could smell the rancid breath coming from his mouth. He leaned forward, arching his face up as he took a long sniff of me. He never stopped looking at me, his eyes locked into mine. He looked up at the sound of footsteps crashing towards us. He stood, taller than anyone I'd ever seen before and ever seen since. Looking down at me, he nodded, turning and disappearing into the woods. He whistled as he strode away. The little people. For as long as I can remember, strange things have happened to me. When I was young, my mother and I lived in my grandmother's house, a big, drafty, Victorian beast of a thing, squatting in the middle of acres and acres of hilly country land. My grandmother was old and couldn't take care of herself, and I often heard my mum whispering to her friends about how crazy she was and how she couldn't wait to put her in a home and get on with her own life. Me, being only 3 or 4 at the time, didn't understand. I thought my grandmother was the most wonderful person on the planet, as little children do. She told me stories about the little people that lived in the hills around the house, and how long ago, when she was only a girl, she'd made a pact with the little people that allowed her to live on their land. My mother once overheard her telling me one of these stories and forbade Grandma from ever telling me anything like that again, claiming she'd just scare me. I wasn't scared. I loved fairy stories. That's what I thought they were. Fairy stories. And I didn't understand why Mum was so upset. She'd grown up in that same house, listening to Grandma's same stories, right? But every time I tried to ask her about them, she'd shush me and tell me I'd get in trouble if she heard me and Grandma talking about the little people ever again. Mine and Grandma's closeness never set well with Mum, and as a child, I never understood the reason. I knew Mum and Grandma didn't get along, and never had, but I didn't know why. I didn't press the subject. I loved my Grandma, and I loved her stories. My mother, who was serious and dark-featured, took after my Greek grandfather more than anyone, while I looked like my grandmother. We shared the same awkwardly big ears, fair freckled skin, and thick red hair. I remember she would often stroke my hair and sigh, saying my mother would never have been prepared for the responsibility of having red hair, so it was passed down to me. I always thought she was making some sort of joke, but her face was a little sad when she said it, so I never further questioned what exactly she meant. When I was 6, Grandma died. She'd been sick all my life, always fragile in health, and one night she went to bed and never woke up. Though I was only a child, I usually helped Grandma get ready for bed. brushing her long, still, vibrantly red hair and braiding it, helping her into her nightgown and tucking her in. Mum always got angry, saying a boy my age shouldn't have to do those things, but I enjoyed any time spent with my grandma. The night she died was like any other, but as I tucked her in, her thin hand suddenly grasped mine in a vice grip. "The pact is up, Geroid. My name is Garrett, but Grandma always said it the traditional Irish way. Garroyd," her lilting accent making my name seem special to me instead of the name of 3 other boys in my class. "The pact is up," she repeated herself, her voice sounding more intense than I'd ever heard it. "I'm sorry, Geroid. There is nothing I can do. You must go from here, so they cannot find you." I was confused and a little scared then, being only 6. I held her hand close. "Who will find me, Grandma?" "What's wrong?" She only clung my hand tighter, her voice a steadfast whisper. "The little people, Geroid. The denizens of the hollow hills, the Shijiog. You must go from here." I wanted to ask her more, but her hand relaxed in mine, suddenly, and she was asleep. She looked peaceful, and I felt like I almost imagined the strange conversation we'd just had. I figured I would ask her more about it the next morning, but the next morning she was dead. Grandma had left all her money to Mum in her will, but the house and surrounding land to me. Since I was too young to even think about owning a house, Mum decided we'd live there until we found better prospects. As a single mother with hectic hours at her job, a free house was too good to pass up. I went to school, Mum went to work as a nurse. Life went on. I continued to play in the hills and woods surrounding the house as I always did. Despite Mum's insistent warnings, I did not. I thought she was afraid I'd fall in a ditch or accidentally get shot by hunters during hunting seasons, and my 6-year-old bravado thought I was above this. One day, on a warm August afternoon just before school started again, I must have only been 8 or 9. I came back from the hills covered in scratches and bruises. She thought I'd fallen down the biggest hill, leading down to the woods in our backyard, until I told her the little people had hurt me. She didn't believe me at first, who would? But I continued to tell her about the little people, how they came out to play with me ever since Grandma died, but they were never nice. They pinched me and scratched me and told me to leave, or else. My mother turned white as a sheet and put down a lease on an apartment in town the very next day. Within a week, we were moved out of Grandma's house in the hills, surrounded by asphalt and car horns. When I ask Mom about the strange things that happened to me in childhood, such as this, she claims not to remember. But she always changes the subject, and her mouth gets in a tight little line. I know she remembers. Moving into the city didn't stop the strange things from happening to me. On the playground, I saw eyes in the bushes, watching me. I would blink only for nothing to be there. Walking home from school, I would hear strange music on the breeze, music that jolted me to my bones and made my head hurt. It always sounded wrong, as if it was out of tune or played on broken instruments. Once I asked a friend if he heard the music, and he called me a freak and never walked home from school with me again. As I lay asleep in our small apartment, I would see lights bobbing just outside my window. Lights that were definitely not from any of the neon signs of the intercity. When I was 10, I wrapped myself up in my blankets and followed the lights, which seemed to whisper my name the way I remember Grandma saying it, Geroid. My mother found me a 5 minutes walk away from our apartment, about to take another step over the edge of a steep ditch. She never saw any lights and made me an appointment with a psychiatrist the next day. I learned to keep what I saw hidden after that, and not to follow any strange lights that whispered my name. Keeping the weird things that happened to myself didn't stop them from happening, unfortunately. They still did, even into high school. By then, I had learned to ignore them, to convince myself it was all in my head, just like my psychiatrist told me when I was a child. I never tried to figure out what was happening to me, or who the little people were. Would you really want to know? I was 17 and an early senior, falling asleep in my literature class as my teacher droned on about speculative fiction. It was only when she said a word, "shidyog," that snapped me back into awareness with the force of a kick to the stomach. The shidyog in Irish folklore are what we common people would call fairies. They have plenty of names: the fair folk, the fae, the she, the little people. They're not as we think of fairies today, small women made of flowers that grant wishes, but something between an angel and a demon that isn't entirely of this world. They are cruel and delight in trickery, and can be vindictive and sadistic, particularly when their land is threatened. Most mortals, that is, you and me, can't see them unless they're born with the sight. Ways to have the sight naturally were considered being the seventh child of a seventh child, or being born with red hair. She said more after that, but I wasn't listening. Little people. Between an angel and a demon, their land, the sight, born with red hair. The bell rang, and I almost fell out of my seat. I was breathing so hard and must have looked so pale that my best friend, Sarah, put her hand on my forehead to check for fever when she came to stand by my desk. "Jesus, Garrett, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "No, much worse," I wanted to say, but didn't. I just shook my head instead. "Fell asleep. Bad dream. You know how lectures get." She laughed, and we walked off to our lockers, with Sarah asking if I was still going to spend the night at her house that night. I said sure, and left for my car feeling like a husk, with everything sucked out of me. I felt watched. When I got home, I cursed myself for saying yes to Sarah's offer. We hung out almost every weekend, but always at my house. A larger apartment my mother had bought further inner city when she got a promotion a few years back. Sarah lived in a big farmhouse on the edge of the hills, and it reminded me too much of Grandma's house for my comfort. I always made excuses on why I couldn't come, but I'd been too distracted today to say no. I finally knew now what had been stalking me all my life. Little people, fair folk, whatever you wanted to call them. My grandmother's stories suddenly made sense to me. Her father had built their house, unknowingly, on fey land. The fairies had probably tortured them and pestered them, until Grandma, the only one able to see them, somehow made a pact with them to let her family live on their land unharmed for as long as she lived. When she died, it left my mother and I at their mercy. I had no clue what sort of pact Grandma had made, as she'd never said. I remembered her asking about it, but she would always pat my hand and say it was a story for another time. Now I almost didn't want to know. As I was waiting for Sarah to come pick me up, I heard the tapping. At first it was faint, and I thought it had begun to rain and hit against the windows. I checked my phone, but there was only light rain scheduled for much later in the evening. I brushed it off, but it continued. It sounded as if someone was standing outside my window and slowly, rhythmically, tapping on the glass with one finger. I turned around to look at the window the tapping was coming from, and it stopped, only to sound as if it were coming from further into the apartment. I must have spent 5 minutes running all over my house like a crazy person, trying to find the source of the tapping, only to have it come from a different window each time I investigated. I was near angry tears when Sarah beeped her horn outside, jerking me out of my frenzy. Never had I been so happy to leave my house as I scooped my overnight bag off the floor and locked the front door behind me. As I jogged to Sarah's car, I chanced to glance into the bushes outside the window where I first heard the tapping and froze. There was a shadow in the bushes. The shadow of something huge and looming, gnarled and twisted. I felt the breath go out of my lungs as the shadow began to move, away from me, further into the few trees planted around my complex. I don't know how long I just stood there, staring into the darkness between the trees, until Sarah laid on her horn and stuck her head out the window. "Garrett, come on, you lazy ass." The sound of her laughter broke my trance, and I turned and ran headlong to her car, almost slipping on the pavement as I lurched into the passenger seat. "Whoa, are you okay? Are you sure you want to do tonight? 'Cause you looked pretty sick at school, and you look pretty sick now." Her voice was almost worried, which was uncommon for loud, brash, unafraid Sarah. "I'm fine. I just thought I saw something in the bushes. A dog, probably. The shadow freaked me out." "You'll never know how much it freaked me out," I thought. She shook her head as she put the car into gear. "You watch way too many horror movies, Garrett Carter. Now let's go." I stole my dad's Netflix password, so the internet is our oyster. I forced myself to grin back as we pulled into traffic. I chanced to glance over my shoulder at the trees. Nothing. No shadow. I still kept my eyes on the spot until we turned a corner, and I could see it no more. By the time we'd driven out to Sarah's old farmhouse, the rain had begun. Sarah was annoyed, claiming her internet shorted out every time so much as a drop of rain fell from the sky. "I guess that's what I get for living out here with my family in the middle of nowhere," she sighed as we unloaded the frozen pizza and French fries we'd picked up to make for dinner later. I checked my phone to see what the weather predicted for later, but I had no signal or Wi-Fi. Figures, as it was like she said, we were in the middle of nowhere. Her nearest neighbors were at least half a mile away. We put dinner in the oven and set up her Xbox so we could watch Netflix, but as she said, the internet wouldn't connect. She about threw her controller through a window, but I suggested we just play video games instead, which calmed her down. We were trying to find a vampire in Skyrim when Sarah went to check on dinner, and I heard it again, the tapping. It sounded louder this time, but I figured it was just the rain, until I remembered it had been raining for almost half an hour, and it hadn't tapped on the window like that once. I swallowed the panic in my throat and tried to ignore it as I fought off wolves and bandits in the game, but the tapping continued, and I realized Sarah hadn't come back from the kitchen yet. I called her name, no answer, but that wasn't too odd. Sarah had a large house, and if she'd gone upstairs or towards the back of the house, she probably wouldn't be able to hear me. I paused the game and stood up, intending to go look for her, when the tapping suddenly stopped. I'd been hearing it for so long now that the absence of its sound was almost louder than the sound itself, and I froze in my tracks. I was trying to psych myself up for taking another step, when thunder suddenly rumbled deafeningly, shaking the glass in the windows. I'm ashamed to say I yelled, startled, as the power suddenly clicked off. I was suddenly alone in Sarah's dark living room when I heard my name being called, not in Sarah's cheerful voice, but in a hoarse whisper that sounded like a bow being sawed across violin strings that were drawn too tight. "Geroid," it whispered. "Geroid." I managed to talk around the lump in my throat as I fumbled my phone out of my pocket, clicking the built-in flashlight on. "Sarah? Sarah?" There was no answer but the continuous whisper of my name, and I knew I had to find the source. I somehow willed my legs to move, and navigated towards the voice, my flashlight illuminating the dark halls. The whisper became louder as I neared her parents' bedroom, which I remembered too late had the largest window in the house, a big picture window with a window seat we used to sit on and read when we were in middle school. As I slowly opened the door, thunder rumbled again and my flashlight winked out. I thought I might have hit the off button with my shaking hand, but as I raised my phone to my face, I saw it had died, even though the battery had been at 92% when I arrived at Sarah's. As I stood on the threshold of the master bedroom, my eyes squeezed shut against the darkness. The whisper became almost deafening, and I felt a cold, stale wind blow around me. I had to go in, and as I stepped forward into the room, the door slammed shut. As I opened my eyes, I fought the urge to run back through the door and leave, but I knew I had to find Sarah, there at the picture window, which was open despite the fact that it only opened from the inside, and I knew her parents would not have left it unlocked, was a creature out of my nightmares. Its shape was large, towering almost to the top of the 8-foot-high window, and it was crouched in the side garden like some monstrous toad. I had expected my first sighting of the shadow from the bushes to look like some sort of eldritch monster, but this creature looked more natural than I could imagine. Its hide looked like bark, its long, wizened arms like tree branches, the hair hanging lankly around its head like moss. It would have almost looked like an enormous stump, if not for the face, which was huge and pointed, with a long, witch-like nose, and a mouth full of broken green, grinning teeth. "At last," the creature said in a voice like groaning trees and snapped violin strings. "We meet." I had been frozen solid upon first sight of the creature, but I somehow found my voice upon hearing it speak. "What the hell did you do with Sarah? Why are you here? What are you?" The creature looked at me, simply, as if it were appraising me, then laughed. Its laugh sounded like wind shrieking through the slats of an unkempt house, and its voice was slow, as if it had all the time in the world. "Some call me the old man of the crossroads. Some call me the one who answers. Some call me Troll." It grinned, as if this was amusing to him. "We have come for payment. The land, the land, the land. Kaim made the pact. The land, the land, the land was hers. But no longer. It is yours, and we have come for payment." I stared at the thing, uncomprehending, until it dawned on me. My grandmother's name was Kaim, and she had made her pact for the land when she was 17, my age. After she died, the Fae waited until I was of age and came for me, for payment, for the pact. I kept my distance from the window. "That doesn't answer all my questions. Where is Sarah?" I yelled over the howling wind, but the creature just chuckled its shrieking wind laugh. "The girl, the girl, the girl. Perhaps she is under the hill. Perhaps we shall keep her there until the payment is made. Perhaps, perhaps, perhaps." I felt my blood turn to ice. These things had Sarah, my best friend, and they seemed to have no intention of giving her back. "What do you want?" "I don't care about the land, take it. Just give Sarah back and leave me alone." The creature sighed, as if it were thinking. Its earthen, hulking body shivered as it scratched its chin with one long, gnarled tree branch finger. "You are a strong one. So was Kaim." It chuckled, heaving another sigh as it settled its body further into the side garden, releasing a smell of overturned earth and damp moss. "I will extend to you the same challenge I extended Kaim. For the land, the land, the land, and for the girl, the girl, the girl. Should you beat me at my own game, the land, the land, the land, and the girl, the girl, the girl are yours. Should you fail..." The creature trailed off and grinned, its leathery face splitting in two, as it showed all its broken teeth. "You are mine." I felt unable to speak, unable to move, unable to breathe. The troll was going to take me, my best friend, and most likely my mom, to God knows where to do God knows what to us if I didn't accept his challenge. I didn't know what to do. "Well, boy, is your silence a refusal?" The creature ran one gnarled hand over the windowsill, and something dawned on me. "If you want me so bad, why don't you just come in here and take me?" It was a foolhardy thing to say, but I figured I could run from it. It moved slower than Christmas. My question seemed to anger it, and its mossy eyebrows met in a snarl. "I cannot come inside unless you invite me, boy. Your friend was kind enough to come outside to me." It grinned then and chuckled. My anger reignited. I needed to get Sarah back. "Fine. I accept your challenge, whatever it is." At that exact moment, lightning cracked across the sky, and for a split second I saw the creature in its entirety, which nearly made my heart stop. It was bigger than I imagined, its back humped and covered in fungi and moss, reaching nearly to the roof of the house. I swallowed. "Delightful. I shall ask you 3 questions, boy. If you answer all correctly, the land, and the girl is yours. We shall leave you alone." Its cracked smile didn't falter. "But if you answer a single question wrong..." It trailed off, one wizened hand sweeping a grand gesture. I didn't need it to elaborate. I nodded, not sure I trusted my voice to speak, as I sat on the edge of Sarah's parents' bed, staring at the creature, backlit by the storm. It rubbed its gnarled hands together in pleasure. "Wonderful. It has been so long since one of your kind accepted my challenge. Now..." It paused, as if deep in thought before beginning, its voice a low, almost melodic rumble. "My tines are long, my tines are short. My tines end ere my first report. What am I?" I almost felt like laughing with relief when I heard the riddle. Grandma and I would spend hours telling each other riddles back and forth when I was a child, and I had gotten so good at them, I would even leave her stumped and come up with answers to her hardest mind-benders. Whenever I asked her why she was so interested in riddles, she would just stroke my hair and say, "You never know when they'll come in handy, Geroid. You never know." I knew now. I wondered if Grandma had told me all the riddles trying to prepare me for the troll to come and ask for payment, or simply to keep her mind sharp. There was no time to think about it now as I mulled over the troll's question. "Well, boy, do you give up?" It sounded pleased, thinking I was so easy to break. I glared at it. No, I was just thinking. I glanced past the troll, just as a bright flash of lightning forked and hit a tree not far from Sarah's horse pasture, and my eyes widened. "Lightning, you're lightning." The troll's eyes narrowed, and I could tell he was surprised at my answer. Very well. He readjusted his bulk, his contorted fingers resting on the windowsill. Never ahead, ever behind, yet flying swiftly past. For a babe I last forever. For adults I'm gone too fast. What am I? I swallowed, my eyes glued to the floor to keep away from looking at the creature in front of me. I thought of how it must have waited all these years, watching, and how the rest of the Fae hated me for being on their land, for being able to see them. I thought of the strange shadows I'd seen melting across my bedroom floor at night, only to disappear when I turned on the bedside lamp. The strange laughter and broken music I heard on winter nights, always out of reach when it swirled in on the freezing wind. How many other children had made fun of me for screaming that I saw squat, frog-like creatures with sharp teeth grinning at me from the woods around the edge of the playground. How I nearly drowned one summer swimming in the lake on Sarah's property, when we were barely in 6th grade, because I felt webbed fingers latch onto my ankle and try to drag me down into the darkness. Childhood, the troll's semblance of a smile twisted into a scowl, and I allowed myself the faintest of grins. I thought of my grandmother standing in front of this same beast at my age, terrified but willing to go to any lengths to protect her family and friends. It made my smile wider. You are a clever boy. Boy, I see. Not clever enough for my final riddle. I know you are not. Its deformed hand raised, and though it couldn't get into the house, its shadow stretched across the floor and sent a bolt of panic through my chest. The thing that all things devours. Birds, beast, tree, flower, gnaws iron, bites steel, grinds hard stones down to meal, slays kings and ruins towns, and beats the highest mountain down. What am I? I took a deep breath. My fist clenched against the quilt on Sarah's parents' bed. My smile had faded as the troll told the riddle. It was one not even my grandmother had alluded to. I refused to let the anxiety show on my face, but as I sat there staring at the ground trying to think, the troll laughed. I had been silent for several minutes, and the storm was getting worse. Every second I delayed, Sarah was stuck under the hill, and I had no idea what they were doing to her. They could already have my mum for all I knew, and I wondered how my grandmother did this. How did she live her life knowing there was a secret world all around her, and everything in it hated her? That she had to risk her and everyone she loved's life just to keep them from mortal harm. She was stronger than me. I didn't know how I was going to handle day-to-day life if I got out of here alive. Do you give up, boy? Boy, it is a difficult riddle. Do not be ashamed to admit defeat. His green teeth showed as he grinned, and I could hear the violin strings snapping and branches creaking in his voice. No, I don't give up. I just need more time. I tried my hardest to keep my voice subdued as the troll shifted to its full height, fingers unfurling. Time was not in the bargain, boy. Either you answer or you do not. My teeth gritted as I opened my mouth to say God knows what, but I stopped. It was as if Grandma was sitting next to me, stroking my hair and shaking her head. The answer was right in front of you, Geroid. You're just too impatient to see it. She'd always say that in the earlier days of our game, when I'd give up in a snit after taking too long to answer a riddle. I knew the answer. Time. Time is the answer. I stood up off the bed and grinned. The troll scowled harder than I'd seen it, opened its mouth and howled. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before in my life, a cacophony of broken screaming instruments and wailing animals and crying women, as well as wind ripping through trees and ocean waves crashing against rock. The window slammed shut with a crack, a few panes of glass shattering and falling onto the window seat. The power flickered on and off crazily, the lights dimming and brightening as the troll howled. Then, as soon as it started, it was over. I opened my eyes from where I'd taken cover behind the bathroom door, and the troll was gone. The only proof of its existence was the faint smell of moss and lichen blowing in from the cracked window, and what I knew had happened. Sarah's parents arrived home not long after and found me sitting under their window, clutching an iron poker from the fireplace, and their daughter missing. I think I passed out when Sarah's mum started screaming. I don't remember much after that. They found Sarah later the next morning, about 3 miles away from her house. She wandered into a neighboring farmer's barn, claiming she'd been abducted by strange women with deer forelegs and hooves, and men with rib cages for torsos. She told the police they forced her to answer riddles to avoid them feeding her strange food and hurting her, but wasn't able to answer all of them. The bruises all over her body attested to that. But the police didn't believe her story. I didn't think they would, but I knew better. She didn't. She was new to this, she told people. Her parents sent her to a psych ward for 3 months. I visited her almost every day I could, and I told her I believed her. She cried, usually, and told me about how food had no taste, and she was hungry all the time, and she couldn't sleep because of the strange music and voices calling her name. The day she was released, she looked terrible. She was skinnier than ever, with dark shadows under her eyes and hollow cheekbones. She hugged me tight, though, and told me she was sorry with tears in her eyes. I wasn't sure what she meant until she vanished out of her bedroom that night. When her parents let me in her room to see if I wanted any of her things, it smelled like moss and lichen. When I left, I saw a hulking shadow under her window, and I thought I heard laughter like creaky branches and storm wind on the breeze. Sarah never came back. I'm not sure if I should be happy or horrified that she didn't. Her time spent under the hill changed her, made her a different person. Maybe she was happier there, now that she was one of them. I didn't know. I'd never know, thank God, though I felt terrible for thinking it. I had Grandma's house torn down, even the foundation. I refused to sell the land, even though I had everyone from farmers to developers begging me for it, offering me a king's ransom for the rich soil. I wouldn't put anybody through that. I wouldn't will it to my children, as if I would have any. When I died, whenever that was, the pact would die with me. I still hear the voices, the music, the whispering. I still see shadows out of the corner of my eye, and I still won't swim in natural bodies of water, because water fae are notorious for trying to drown people. I still hear them calling, though I've gotten better at ignoring it. I won't go to them, and I won't listen to them. On late winter nights, when I'm up in the wee hours trying to write another chunk of whatever it is I'm working on before my publisher's deadline, the call is the hardest to resist. Sometimes I find myself out of my chair, with my hand on the doorknob, before I remember Grandma, telling me to be strong, calling me Geroid. I remember the troll, thinking he'd won. I remember Sarah, how vibrant and full of life she had been. Before the hill took her, it's enough for me to lock my doors tighter, put my headphones on and drown out whatever it is I hear. I know they won't ever go away, won't ever stop trying and reaching for me, and I know no one will ever believe me. But for as long as I can remember, strange things have happened to me, and they've probably happened to you too. So next time you hear an unexplained noise in the middle of the night, or see a mysterious light just beyond the hill, don't go searching for it. Don't follow it. Close your eyes, walk the other direction, and be glad you can't see the things that I can see. Dear woman, I really wish I had some kind of explanation for this. I'm a rational person. It's not that I don't believe in the paranormal, I do. It's just that I think most of the time there's a more mundane reason behind events other than ghosts or demons did it. Even though I've had plenty of my own paranormal experiences, I'm not one to jump to conclusions. That's why the story of Dear Woman surprised me. That's why, hours after it happened, I still can't account for the events which took place last night. My daughter is 6 years old. She just turned at the beginning of June. She was born exactly 2 weeks before my own birth date, and in some ways, we are annoyingly alike. We're both headstrong. We love to read. And when you combine those traits, you get little girls who love scary stories and refuse to listen to adults when they say, maybe you should wait until you're older. For her birthday, I bought her a couple of scary books. The series is called Short and Shivery. They're sort of like the awesome scary stories to tell in the Dark series, except the artwork isn't nearly as cool. Every night since then we've been reading these stories together, at least when she isn't at her dad's. He doesn't like scary stories, so it's a special thing that she and I bond over. Last night I picked a shorter story. She was up past her bedtime and I was tired. I saw one called The Deer Woman, which was based off an old Poncan legend. I won't bore you with the details, but it goes a little something like this. Two brothers are attending a celebration over the recently successful buffalo hunt. One of the brothers spots an intensely beautiful woman who he's never seen before. She is dancing with the other women and wearing a white buckskin dress and has eyes so enchanting he can't look away. When she stretches out her hand to him, he is compelled to follow her. She leads him into the woods, but unbeknownst to either of them, the younger brother follows. He's not far behind when he hears a cry. By the time he finds his elder brother, he's dead, gored by some terrible beast. He consults the wise woman of the tribe, who tells him that the woman was in fact a spirit called Deer Woman. She is a terrible enchantress whose beautiful face hypnotizes men, forcing them to stare only into her eyes. It is because of this that they can't look down and see her feet, which are actually deer hooves which no moccasins will fit. The younger brother then organizes another dance. He has the men build high walls around the village and a gate made of tree branches. He tells the men not to look at the women's faces, only at their feet. Then he begins the celebration. The other men, predictably, can't keep their eyes off the beautiful women's faces, and so it is only the younger brother who finds Deer Woman kicking her hooves as she dances amongst his people. He tackles her. She transforms into a hideous beast, nearly killing him. Then she leaps over the wall, and by the time the other men can bypass the tree branch gate, they see only a giant deer bounding away in the moonlight. The legend ends on the note that the tribe never saw Deer Woman again, but that they heard news from travelers that other tribes were now having problems with the evil spirit. I didn't think it was a particularly scary story, but my daughter was unexpectedly affected by it. Twice during the night she came upstairs, calling to me that she was scared of the Deer Woman, thinking she was just trying to stay up later, a common tactic with her. I told her to go back to sleep. I wouldn't let anything hurt her, I said. I promised. This morning, my boyfriend went downstairs to help her get ready to go to his mum's. My daughter said again that she was afraid of the Deer Woman. My boyfriend gave a half-hearted, "Oh yeah," in response. But then she said, "She was in my room last night," and she pointed to her high ceiling where a bunch of dark smudges were strewn across the paint. They look a hell of a lot like deer prints. If you like the story, please leave a subscription. Comment what video you would like to see next and share the video. It means a lot to me. We'll hear from each other soon.